Hi guys, welcome back to Visibility by Design with your host Juliette Stapleton. My guest today is someone I had a lot in my recent life because I have been going through a lot of training. I had a rabbit hole of research and listened to so much. I am excited to bring you Fabrice Boulanger, who is a human design and gene keys expert. And Fabrice, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Juliette. Thank you for having me here.
What I love, guys, about Fabrice, and not only that he has this really calming, nice grounding energy, so it's really pleasant to listen to him, and the way Fabrice brings this information about human design and gene keys, which if you have done any kind of, tipping your toes into that, you can find that it's very heavy and, could be very philosophical. Sometimes it's just not clear. With Fabrice and his interpretation of everything, I found the clarity I was looking for a long time. And that's why he's one of my favorite guests on this season of Visibility by Design. What we want to talk about today is, of course, how to show up, how to use all that information. And we won't go through everything naturally. So we decided we're going to look at the lines. But before we dive in, maybe Fabrice, I can ask you, what is, when you are talking about human design or gene keys, you talk about brand. So in your perception, and just so everybody's on the same page, what are we going to talk about? What is the brand?
Yeah, so, when you look at your gene keys profile and human design, especially in the gene keys, they use those specific words: your life's work, your purpose, your vocation, your brand, your pearl, and it gets a bit confusing. What is what, and it's true that you get to see some of your gifts, but there's one in particular, and the gene key and the line that are connected to this one, which is your life's work and also your brand, which is really your image in the world. Yes. And it's really about, sharing yourself authentically so that the right people can find you and the right people can be attracted to you. And authentically here is very important because, when we hear about branding, marketing, like I get headaches just looking into that field nowadays because it's the opposite of authentic. And it's a lot of lies and people trying to be something different and, generic strategies and social media strategies. And when we look at our own profile, well, everyone is meant to do branding differently. Yeah. And that's what we're going to be talking about today with the lines, because the lines are probably the easiest and most obvious and also the best to use immediately. You get like straight tips, and if you apply those to your business, you can really start expanding, which is something that I've experienced, and my motto now is less is more, less is more, less is more. And by less, it's not about hours or effort or energy. By less, I mean less of the extra stuff that's not me, and the more I'm just being myself and doing branding according to that, the better it goes.
I absolutely agree. And yes, we can talk about, being projectors. You're an emotional projector, I'm a splenic projector, and the whole thing about, we don't have the energy. But I see it all differently. I really do what you just said. It's all about those extra things that you think you should be doing. And before we go into the lines, I want to also add it's not that all the strategies out there are manipulative or wrong, there is a lot of that, because people take something, they're like, okay, this is how I sell, and so they embody this different image that's not who they are. But I think that it's 2022. People are becoming so much, first of all, exhausted from that, and savvier, and so that sort of marketing is going to eventually, it's only targeting people who are not thinking, I think, or not awoken, to the bigger picture. But sometimes what I find is that you're going to follow someone who feels very authentic. They do things brilliantly. You can just see everything kind of falls together. There's no manipulation. You just get really, really, into them. But they are a different type. They have a different profile. The way they show up is differently. It works for them. It does. It genuinely works for them. They're doing it the right way.
Yeah.
But when you try to go and they put a course out there and you spend a lot of money and you try to do this and it just doesn't work. I've been in those shoes so many times. And it's only when I started studying human design profiles, types, that's when I started seeing, hang on a second, this is a person who's a manifesting generator. They're completely different. Or, their profile has line 4. They're all about people. And I'm 1-3. I'm all about myself. And it's not a bad thing. And so this is what I want to highlight today. And I think maybe we can just go one by one on all the lines to start with and just give some sort of practical tips.
Yeah, and before we go into that, what you just mentioned is really important, and it's probably the number one reason why I got into those systems in the first place. Because I came from a background of being a yoga and meditation teacher and kind of studying systems where the same practices apply to everyone. And then a few years of going much deeper into, reading lots of books on business and marketing and money, and same thing. It's just, one person sharing what worked for them and thinking that it applies to everyone. And then when you finally find those systems, it just starts with your own uniqueness. And that's what's amazing about it. It's like, hey, we're actually all meant to do this differently. And so sure, you can find some role models who are similar to you, and get keys from other people, but there's only one like you. Like if we put all of the pieces of your profile together, because sure, there's over 1 billion people on this planet who have a line 1 brand and so on, but that's just one aspect. When we put all of them together into, a unique profile that is, that you have, for example, there's no more competition. You do you, there's nobody else who can do you. And so, from that, competition only happens when we all try to do the same thing.
I love it. Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the word uniqueness, and I know that this has to do with line 1, even though it obviously applies to everybody.
Yeah.
So let's
the
start.
line. Well, one of the words for the line 1 is the creator, and it makes sense being this first line and being the foundational line. And so in general, the line 1 will be attracted to, doing something new and unique. It's not really interested in repeating something that has already been done. Yeah. Although the line 1 can really get into systems that already exist and so on, and it's going to dig really deep. I mean, you're a 1-3, so you know a lot about that. The first line is also called the investigator for a reason. Yeah, it likes to dig really, really deep to get to the foundation, to get to the, to check if that thing is solid or not. And that's why I always say, like, on courses, on, as for affiliate marketing, as testimonials, the best ones are always from 1-3s. It's the especially the first line, but both of them, the 1-3, I call it the 1-3 stamp of approval, and if the 1-3 says, like, this thing is solid, this thing really works, because you're combining that first line, like, investigation with the third line, which is just trying things out and knows what works and doesn't work, and put together, it's really solid. But coming back to the first line, and I guess for, practical tips on marketing, self-empowerment is really the key of the first line. You're not here to look left and right and what other people are doing. And no, you need to really, like, embrace your aloneness and find this sense of self-empowerment. And then, okay, like, who is this creator? What is this creative part in me? And how does it want to come out? And so especially if you're 1-3, which is like a purely personal profile, it's like, you are the brand. It's you. It's a direct extension of you and of your own life. And, it's the most self-centered of all, but not in a negative way, actually in a very, very beautiful way. And that's the one thing that's needed, because a 1-3 or first line in general without self-empowerment is really going to struggle. But once there is that self-empowerment, self-approval, self-validation, then, the whole world follows.
I so agree. Can I just put my 2 cents here as a 1-3 line, or as 1?
Sure.
This is something that has been a theme. I sometimes call it periods of hiding, when you feel like you've nothing to give or anything. I know, and I researched, so I know the core of this. And the core of this is definitely not the self-approval. You're not approving of yourself. You think you're either, who are you to do this? Oh, I'm doing it in the wrong way. Do I have a right? That was a huge one for me, pivoting my, into marketing to human design, because I'm not a certified human design expert and I don't want to get certified. And yet I'm thinking, who am I to share? And that was causing so much holding back. It's so important to just allow yourself and do whatever you, I find whatever lights you up, let's use that phrase, in your research. and just leaning into that and just sharing what you're doing, because you can be holding back, and then there could be months and months and months that you're not doing anything, you're not promoting, you're not selling. We don't like the word selling, but we're not serving. And so your bank account will let you know. And my line 3 now, don't do this, I'm telling you now. Make sure that whenever you're feeling a little insecure, that you point all your focus on how can you empower yourself? How can you find joy in this?
It's funny that you mentioned the bank account, because I was actually having that conversation with Luciano recently, because he's a 1-3, and my wife is a 1-3 as well. So I have a lot of 1-3s around me. And I was like, it's good in a way that we have to make money in this life and that we have to go into business, because if it wasn't for that, so many 1-3s would just stay by themselves and just do their own thing and not share their gifts with the world. And sometimes you need that pressure to put yourself out there, because on one hand, it's true, like for the first line, it is recommended to only share knowledge that is solid. So don't, if you study something yesterday, don't go and talk about it tomorrow. You really need to feel solid, and that's why everyone listens to you and trusts you. But the shadow to that, like you were mentioning, is just to wait and wait and wait, and it's still not solid enough, still not good enough. I still feel that my foundation is a little bit shaky. There's a crack there, there's a leak there, and it's never going to get perfect.
Somebody will come in and point finger at you and tell you, who are you to, all these kind of things. I had exactly the same thing when I just started my online visibility as a marketing expert, that I'll just get phone calls and people will call me out. And it's true, it's a shadow. It's not it's not where you actually flying when you're actually feeling good. You are feeling good when you're sharing. So if you feel that whatever information you're like lines, I love lines. This is something lights me up. I am ready to share about lines. I can feel that, even though I'm not an expert, as in I don't have 20 years of experience of talking about it. That's I think is the key.
And what you're talking about now really is self-motivation. Whatever you do has to come from your own enthusiasm, excitement, curiosity. And again, we're talking about you as a 1-3. There's the first line, investigation, the third line of trying things out, and exploring. And you do you, and as a result of that, your everything that you have to share can serve the world, can serve the others, but it cannot be backwards. It cannot be a transpersonal motivation of, oh, what do people need? Because I've seen it a lot in 1-3s. When you start thinking, what does the world need? And this applies to all personal lines. So the first 3, the 1, the second, and the third, and we keep mentioning the 1-3 because it's the purely personal profile, but you're not here to be transpersonally motivated, meaning that you only get motivated by yourself and your own interests. And again, as a result of that, you do serve the whole. But if you put it backwards and you try to first serve the whole and think about others and the market and this and that, it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
I think the insecurity that line 1 has, that biggest problem, it's always about, am I enough? So I've had situations where I would fill a program and then I would start feeling exactly what you just described. What do they need? And I didn't believe that they came to me because of me, which all of my clients, they will say, yes, Juliette, you're a gift. That they say you're a gift. And I'm like, how am I a gift? What am I giving you? Like, how much, what do you need? But it's not about that. It's really about you decide, and they will follow. And if some of them, fall off the wagon in a program or something, that actually happens anyway. This was the big aha moment I wanted to share.
Yeah, beautiful.
Great. Let's go to line 2. Otherwise, I'll be talking for the rest of the podcast. Line 2. By the way, forgive me if it wasn't you, but I thought it was you who likened the lines to a house where you have the foundations. Was that you?
It's something that you hear a lot about from Rao, so the founder of human design and the traditional human design teachings. That's why, the first line is linked to the foundation of the house, and then the different floors and the 6th line climbing up on the roof, and the analogy is coming from them.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think that, but for me, it was, maybe I mentioned you mentioned it when I heard this, but it just made a lot of sense. And that's why I wanted to bring this in. So when we're going now by line, it's sort of like you're going from the foundations, from the core, from this concrete that you poured in, up. So, okay. Line 2, what are the goodies?
So the line 2 is all about passion, first of all, and it's all about naturalness and ease. Yeah, and that's something very amazing about line 2 is that they're usually, and if someone was to come to me and a line 2 asking me like, what is my life purpose? What should I do? Whatever has always been easy and natural for you. The one thing that you never really had to work for. And I don't mean that, you might have put 10,000 hours into that thing, but it was easy and natural from the beginning. It's like, yes, this feels so right, because that's what you're here to transmit to the world. It's your passion for that thing. And the second line has this unique, as a 1-3, you know how difficult it might be to stick to one thing for a long time. That third line keeps on wanting to jump to other interests, and we'll get to the third line in a minute. But the second line has this amazing ability to just, it's that typical story of like, I was born with this gift, and I'm going to follow this thing, and I can do it my whole life. It can, whether it's a singer, musician, dancer. Actually, the dancer is one of the names for the second line in the Gene Keys. It's really this idea of being lost in the dance itself, yeah, and deeply involved with this thing. And there's another word for the second line, which is the hermit. And people get confused between those, like the dancer from the Gene Keys is the hermit from Human Design. How does that make sense? When we think of the hermit, the way I imagine it is, some kind of a, yogi in the Himalayan mountains, like in a cave somewhere. And the hermit is never just doing nothing. The hermit is actually busy all day long. And if we take this archetype, it's like, just busy meditating and practicing the whole day. And it's so busy doing that and so dedicated and devoted to that one thing that it doesn't really have time for anything else. And so that's why it has become a hermit, because it's directly connected to that one thing. Another word linked to the second line is marriage. And it's not necessarily marriage in terms of another person, although it can be, because the second line learns a ton through their relationship. The second line has a really hard time to look at themselves. And so they need feedback. They need this mirror from the other to learn about themselves. But marriage also in the sense of being married to that thing, being married to your passion, being married to your work, and I see that a lot with second lines around me, and even readings that I've given. There's that one thing that feels natural, and you're here to transmit that. You're here to show people, to be a role model of, moving through life with ease and flow, and give that kind of inspiration.
How can this show in, say, social media posts or, the angles? How can what are the good ways for them to show it?
It's tricky with the second line, because I want to say like this, you're not here to strategize in the first place. What I noticed with them is that when they really do their thing, it just, it's the same as I said to the fifth line. Like, if you're like, it's not going to be difficult for you to attract attention, and as long as, and we're going to get to the fifth line, but with the second line, and I see a lot of second lines being, kind of like unique jobs or unique occupations. Like one of the closest second lines I have around me at the moment, she's a singer, and she's been a singer since she's a kid, and now she's 35, and she's still a singer, and she's the best singer in her city, and it just kind of happens and flows for them, so it's a personal line. So you do your thing, yeah, and just share yourself, show yourself. That's the main thing, for the second line. Just put yourself out there. Don't be, because if you're only a hermit and if you're hiding your gifts, nobody can, can see it. And what happens very often for the second line is because they're unable to see their own talent. They don't really know that they have it until people tell them. Yeah. And so you need to listen to the feedback of the world. And if 10 people like, hey, you're really good at this thing, and Ra, again, using the analogy of the house, Ra was talking about, the second line being that the hermit, on the ground floor doing their own thing, and everyone from the outside is watching through the window because that thing they're doing is amazing. They're like, wow. And they're like, come on, come out. You need to share yourself with the world.
So kind of behind the scenes, just film yourself doing things, just share what you're doing. You don't need to teach, you don't need to strategize, you don't need to explain what you're doing. Yep. Just show what you're doing. That's where the magnetic thing, that's what I'm picking up.
And if you don't know what you're good at, like if you're still not confident in your gifts and you feel lost, ask feedback from the outside and listen to that feedback. That's the most important thing.
You know, I want to mention, I have this pot of honey here. It's a beautiful gold infused pot of honey. And the way it came into my life is that I just saw a lady who was talking about this download of that she needs to do this honey and infuse it with Reiki and gold and all this. And I invited her to this podcast. We had Shanae Woods here on the podcast, and she sent it to me from Alaska. She sent me this. And when I'm thinking about line 2, she's 2-4. So when I'm thinking about line 2, it was just her talking about the downloads, talking a little bit about the honey. It wasn't even explaining anything, wasn't teaching us anything. All she was is just talked about this thing, even when she couldn't show it. And I was sold immediately on this. That's the magnetism.
And there was no strategy behind it whatsoever.
No, not at all. Let's move to line 3.
Line 3. So the third line is the line of experimentation, of exploration, of trial and error, and there's, the third line is known for its resilience, because there's a lot of falling down and getting back up, and everyone is very grateful for the third line and their experiment. The third line is here to find new ways and try new things. And so maybe a lot of things just don't work, but then occasionally the third line stumbles upon these things like, oh, that really works. And so the third line, if we want to make it practical in terms of marketing and branding, you're here to share your experiences. And by experience, it's not so much, of course, there can be storytelling, but the human experience is more of a fourth line thing, whereas the third line is really like, share the results of your experiments. Yeah, it's like, I've done that, I've tried it, I know that it works. Yeah, that's really, and let's say we're combining now lines because we can do the 1-3. And so if you're 1-3, it's like you're combining the first line of like, I've researched this, I've studied this, I've gotten to the bottom of it, this is really solid, and on top of it, I've experimented with this, and I know that it works for this and this and this and that reason, and those were the results on myself. Yeah, so it's really about that. You're here to share your results, and again, your exploration is self-motivated. The third line is the last of the personal lines, and so it's just your own curiosity. The third line is this mutative line, which is really here, as I said, to find kind of new ways of doing things. And the third line, for that reason, is the line of money. And it's funny because, it's very often I also hear about third lines struggling with money because they cannot stick to one thing for long enough. And the third line is so curious about so many things. It might have like a bunch of different jobs and try different things. And if it's done like in an immature and chaotic level, there's no consistency. And, there's no, because ideally you want to find this thread that is linking everything together, and you keep on building on top of the other thing, or at least you learn from experiences and you can take them into the next thing. Yeah. But so for the third line, I lost my train of thought of what I was just saying before. What was the one thing I was saying?
You were talking about the third line, sharing the experience, sharing the results, and keeping it to one theme or core things. Yes.
So you can try a bunch of different things, but make sure that there is, somewhat of a thread. Yeah, it doesn't have to be exactly the same theme. It doesn't have to be, but keep on carrying, don't burn everything down and what you did before. Yeah, make sure that you keep on learning, and over your life, so much of your brand is going to be about you, and because what makes you you is all of those unique things that you put together. Yeah, and it's in marketing, it's called this the Vinci Effect. Is when you try to enter one field, it's difficult to compete in that field. But once you start bridging two fields together, then suddenly you have already something unique. Yeah, like, I don't know, let's say like try to become the best yoga teacher. That's going to be difficult. Try to become, the best mountain guide. That's also going to be difficult. But now you're bridging those two things together, yoga and the mountains. And maybe you add a third element, a fourth element, a fifth element. And more, that's what's happening, is bridging all of those things together into one thing that is unique. And that's something that you can do as a third line. But coming back, yes, now remember the original train of thought, which was about the money, the third line being about money. And as I said, some people struggle because it's too chaotic and it's too over the place, and they never get to really have a business because they stop too early. But the story of the third line is also, the nowadays so many startups, starting all over the place. And occasionally we hear about this crazy story of someone who's launching this thing and they become like a billionaire within, or a millionaire within a few years. That's kind of the story of the third line. And what we don't see is they've tried so much before. We only see the last success, but that's the story of the third line, which is you try something, you try something, you try something, you try something. And then, maybe 9 out of 10 things don't really catch. And then the 10th thing, it really does. Yes. And that's also very, very typical of a third line.
That is, I can testify to that. I can testify to combining things, to giving up too early sometimes because you just want to constantly bring something new. And yet, with my personal experience, I've always been Facebook marketing. I niched into profile marketing, which is personal profile, and I'm really passionate about it. But there was so many things that I had to try. And I was even creating programs about those things. And I know I have some clients with me for 5 years, and it'd be like, Juliette, 3 years ago, you were saying a different thing. And yet it's all about the trial. It's all about trying it. And then, when you go deeper, you're saying, you know what, yes, maybe, for some people it might work, but actually, like for me personally, it didn't. So moving on, and it's just you kind of moving and trying. And then when you find that, maybe it's a projector thing, but when I found the niche, when I added human design, completely different modality to marketing, and I found it's a completely different opening in the business, in how you attract clients and everything. So it's why I'm saying here, it's not about just even line 3 or line 1 or whatever, but or projector, but when you find your thing aligned with your design, miracles do happen. So I thought that this was a good moment to add financially as well.
And what you mentioned there is interesting. Some of your students saying like, hey, you were saying something different a few years ago. Doesn't matter. Like as a third line, you don't be afraid to make mistakes, or don't be afraid to change your mind. Don't be afraid. It's, again, it's a mutative line. It's literally the line of change. And in Gene Keys, it's called the changer, like really. And look back at it with humor. You're able to laugh and like, oh, well, now I have a different view on things because I've had different experiences. Because what I've noticed, again, let's take the 1-3 profile. And, on one hand, we have the first line, which is so like, heavy and grounded and really hard to move. Yeah. And it just wants to get to the bottom of things. And once it finds some kind of a solid foundation, it doesn't want to shake that foundation. And then we have the third line, which is exactly the opposite kind of energy. It wants to shake that foundation. It wants to build in new ways. And somehow as a 1-3, you have to find a way to make them both work. What I've noticed though, is that the 1-3s that give too much power to their mind, therefore more connected to their first line, they get a bit stuck. They get stuck. They're afraid to try new things. They're afraid to make mistakes. They're afraid to look or sound stupid. And they get stuck. And then I see those who really let their, subconscious third line tendency to take over and to lead the way. Those are the ones who become successful. And they're always like at the cutting edge, of new technologies, new trends, like you have this ability to like, keep your finger on the pulse of the market and to move fast. So that's really important. It's like, get your lightness and your fire from the third line, and don't get too stuck in the first line mind, which can really slow you down.
It's so accurate. I'm very excited now because now we are kind of going into the last 3 lines, and that's your domain because you're 4-6.
Yeah.
So let's start with line 4, which is your conscious line.
Yes, exactly. So I'm a 4-6, and the fourth line. Well, the fourth line is the line of the heart. It's the line of service. It's the line of community. And so it's very driven actually by the other, And so if the first line is self-motivated, the fourth line is motivated by the community, by the tribe, by the market, by the world, by the idea of serving. And it sounds beautiful and all, but it's not purely selfless. The human design like balances it out with the word opportunist, which also gives us a clue about this fourth line, which is that, you get a lot of opportunities through your network. Yeah. And so as practical business advice for the fourth line, your connections are everything. The people you meet, the people you talk to, the friendships that you get to keep. And it's true, everything for me comes through my connections. Yeah. Real, also human stories. And so for the fourth line, testimonials are especially important. What was the other's experience going through this? What do people say about you? Yeah, all of those things are really important. And so keeping your network healthy, and of course there can be, the shadow of the fourth line is the politician, or at least the shadow politician, which is, being disingenuous and manipulating others just for the sake of opportunity. It's all about, gaining power through the network, at whatever cost. So we have to find, the a mixing of the two, because one of the shadows of the fourth line is to be too idealistic with the values of the heart and naive. There's a certain naivety to the fourth line, which thinks that everyone is just it's all about love, and it's all selfless, and it's like, no, the reality of the world is quite different. So don't give everything to the outside. You need to also take care of yourself. You also need to think of your own needs, which is a whole journey for the fourth line. And for that reason, we can really learn from the first line. Yes, there is a direct connection between the first and the fourth, between the second and the fifth, and between the third and the sixth. And there are things to learn from each other. And I've learned self-care from the first line. And the first line can learn about service and love from the fourth line. Yes, we have things to learn from each other, and I get grounded. That's why I have so many 1-3s around me, because as a 4-6, there's a direct connection. There's a harmony between the two profiles. They're essentially the same profile, but one is at the personal frequency and the other is transpersonal. Yeah, so I get grounded by this. Yeah, that's the fourth line. And I'm thinking now, in terms of like direct marketing for the fourth line. Well, yes, testimonial, bring people together. I stop posting and bring people together around not even you per se, but the thing that you're doing, the knowledge that you're sharing. In my case, I'm a 6th line, so there's also the teacher aspect to it. That's what I did with the Facebook group. I stopped posting so much on my personal page, and now all the human design Gene Keys content, at least on Facebook, is in the group. And that feels much better. Give people time to get to know you. Yeah, as a fourth line, don't try to sell to strangers. You really don't. Advertising, all this thing, leave it to the 5th line maybe, but not the 4th. Yeah, you're really not here to sell to strangers. So give people time. Share yourself, show yourself as much as possible, so that people can start, trusting you. Because usually that's something I've noticed as a 4th line. People naturally start trusting you because they sense this quality in you, but it takes time. It really takes time to show.
It's so interesting because like I don't have obviously 1-3. It took me 4 years, and then painfully taking 1,500 people away from my group so I can delete it. And only after that, I found true freedom, where I could share, on my personal profile. I can repurpose on the page. I don't feel the need of having the group, because I suffered so much with the need of hosting the group. But when I'm looking at your group, which is just so natural, there's a very natural feel. It's not that it's Fabrice's show, even though you're posting and you're promoting your offers and everything that you do, but it's not about this is a real true sense of a community. And I think that this is what the 4 line, I see that with some other people that I know that have 4 line in their profile. It's just for them to bring people together. And of course, in terms of marketing and sharing, you can share as much as you choose, but the more you share about yourself, and if you are very multi-passionate, you have loads of other things that you're into, share that, because we people work with people. I don't work with Fabrice just because he's talking about human design. There will be like this, there's like a rainbow of other things that I also like about him, and that's why he's here now. Yeah, so that's how we choose who we hire, that's how we choose who we marry. It's all about the whole picture. And I think that this is very important if you're a people's person, if people are so important in you as a line 4 profile. It's all about people and connections, and you will get opportunities through that. But just show up, everything built, have like coffee meetings. People can meet you for a coffee, the 15 minutes little Zoom calls. Maybe that's something that you will enjoy, and that will build that network around you. People need to experience you. I think maybe things like that, I think could really work. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. 100%. And building a solid reputation for yourself. And I don't mean it in a manipulative kind of way. And again, like, hopefully if you're 4th line and you hear this, it should be, something that feels genuine coming out of you. But again, working on those connections and reputation in the sense of, think of the long-term interests of the community and of other people. Yeah. So don't, because I've done in the past in other businesses, not connected to this, kind of cheap money grabs and being a bit too manipulative. I have the 2644 in my design, and the 26 has this shadow of, it's the salesman, but it can kind of lie to itself and use like strategies that are not really clean. And then you just kind of ruin your reputation by doing that anyways, and so it's really like, think long-term, think community, the people, and showing up in a way that is consistent. And I don't mean consistent in the sense that you have to be there every single day, but consistent in who you are and what you stand for. That you're really here to bring the heart back into business and higher ideals back into business. And, that's what, that's why people will be attracted to you.
Yes. Yeah. Wonderful. Shall we move to line 5?
Yeah.
Is line 5 like the most complicated line out there, would you say? I have a very strange impression of line 5. Everyone in my family has a subconscious line 5. Everyone. So
really,
okay. I'm experiencing it a lot.
Well, I don't know if it's the most complicated, but it's not always the easiest to be in, although it has an amazing gift as well. And so I was mentioning that the 2nd line is directly connected to the 5th. Yeah. And the reason is that the 2nd line is the one that is constantly projecting on the world. The 2nd line has a hard time looking at itself and can only look at the outside. Whereas the 5th line is the one that constantly gets projected on. Yeah. Those projections can be very positive or very negative. And it's rare, especially if it's a conscious 5th line, but not only. But usually it's rare that someone feels neutral about a 5th line person. It's usually like, I really love them or I really hate them, or like, I can't stand them. Ra, again, the founder of human design, was a 5-1. Very polarizing figure. Half of the people love him, like fanatic kind, and he was a ego manifester, so it adds to it as well. But it's this crazy like fanatic thing. And what Ra said, you stick to what Ra said no matter what. And then others who get so turned off, like they hear him speak once and like, oh, never again, and they get completely turned off by human design, the whole system, because of the way he was. That's very typical of the 5th line. Those projections. I call the 5th line a karmic magnet or a karmic mirror for that reason. So if someone has some kind of subconscious story playing out and they need another actor to play this thing out and to project it onto, it's usually going to be a 5th line. So if today my subconscious story is that I'm the victim of a certain scenario, I'm going to blame it on the 5th line. Yeah. And it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, they get amazing projections. And as I said, for the 5th line, it's not difficult for you to attract people. They have this specific shine and aura, they seduce people in. But the very same people that used to, worship you, tomorrow might be ready to crucify you, and of course here, I put it here in an extreme way. Mm-hmm.
I have to say this because I witnessed a human design expert going really, like, she was so magnetic when she spoke about human design, and then something happened. And what you just described about Ryan being, 5-1 profile, and literally there was a campaign that I watched on Instagram turning against. I didn't know at that stage what profile I had, it was just at the beginning, but it's really, really true. And I see that also in people that, my family, as I mentioned, everyone is 3-5. So the 5 profile, when people turn, they turn. Yeah. But it's not about you. It's about those people. I think it's so important for line 5 to keep that in mind, not to take it personally.
And sadly, I see a lot of 5th lines that just start hiding. They are so tired of the projection field that they just hide. And it's very sad, because I love 5th line. I really love them. I love spending time with them. I love talking to them because I know what they are, and I get to enjoy this energy for what it is. I'm not playing out stories onto them because it's done consciously. But I've seen a lot of 5th line in my life having to deal with those kinds of stories. And it's important, the 5th line is called the heretic in human design, and it's it's kind of like the story of Jesus, and eventually Jesus dies on the cross. You have to be ready, metaphorically, to die on the cross for what you stand for, for your work. You have to be ready to take some fire. But don't play too much into the projections. That's the main key here, because the more you play and enjoy and indulge in the positive projections, the more you'll have to pay the price on the negative side. And the 5th line always feels like it has something to hide, and it's aware of those projections and can kind of use it in a manipulative way. And make yourself as human and vulnerable as possible, while still responsibly stepping up as a leader, because that's the ideal 5th line, a responsible leader bringing practical solutions to the world. That's why everyone is expecting something of you. They're expecting you to be their savior, their helper. If someone has a problem, they're going to come to the 5th line because they know that the 5th line has the solutions. So as marketing strategy, practical, solution oriented, what are the main problems that people are facing, and what are your solutions for those?
Interesting, because with the projections, usually when somebody is expecting something of you that you didn't promise, the main thing for you to do is set clear boundaries. And I think listening about and researching about line 5, setting clear boundaries is so important. So have your and pre-qualify people. Be very clear, first of all, telling them what solution you're helping and what you're not, because people can come to you and just assume that you are now the savior for this problem, but you might be only doing, or even just interested in doing, only this. You don't want to deal with the rest. And so being very clear in your marketing language is so important for you. And then setting up these boundaries, contracts, if it's onboarding clients, be very, very careful. This is what we're going to cover, and the rest we're not covering. So you can always fall back on something. You're not going to feel like you didn't deliver, because that wasn't what you promised in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Being super clear on those boundaries is gonna serve you a lot along the way.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to the roof.
The last one, the 6th line, the teacher, the role model. There's quite a few names for it. The main difference between the 5th and the 6th line is, if the 5th line is here to bring solutions to people's problems, so more like, the 5th line is the typical archetype of the coach. That's, someone has a problem and you're here to help them in the moment. It's kind of like a in the now, short-sighted kind of thing, whereas the 6th line is all about teaching. It's really a story of like, teach a man how to fish kind of thing, instead of just feeding him for a day. Yeah. And that's the 6th line. The 6th line is known for its farsightedness, for being future oriented. Yeah. And the long-term vision. So how can I have the most reach? Well, it's by teaching what I know and teaching people how to do it for themselves, or teaching people, and that's what I'm doing more and more. Like, I'm doing less and less readings, and more I'm just teaching this stuff, because that's really what I love the most. Yeah, I'm much more a teacher than a coach, and I'm still a projector, so I like to guide people and so on. But yeah, teaching, You're really here to share your wisdom, and the sixth line is always comes with a certain natural wisdom, and it's important to tap into that, and to share it with people. And then also, everything you've studied and learned and all of that, and structure it in a way that is very educational. You're really here to educate people. It's not so much about you per se, although there is the story of the role model for the sixth line, but that's a whole life journey. And so towards the later years, and especially in their 50s and up, you become more and more of this embodied role model. And then it's not about teaching and telling people what to do, but it's really being like a living embodiment of those teachings. Yeah, so that just by being near you, people can in a way get the teachings because you embodied them. So education centered. If we want to make it really practical in terms of marketing and branding, it's all about education.
How is it different from line 1, which is also about, sharing the information on the findings? Do you see the difference in the angle maybe, or?
The view is different because the first line is the most short-sighted, and it's for a reason. It's so that the first line can dig and dig and dig and dig and dig and really get into the details of things, and share the intricacies of a system. And the sixth line has more of this meta view, which is really about going larger and larger and larger and larger, and building, like making a meta system out of several systems and bringing it all together, and giving like the bigger frame and bigger picture. It's kind of like, it's more of another name for the sixth line is the visionary, and to bring kind of like new and groundbreaking ideas or concepts, or is often, especially if it's a conscious sixth line, it can be the 6-2s can always be like kind of ahead of their time, and sound like very ungrounded, especially maybe for a 1-3 profile, because the first line is like, what is realistic right now? That's really what it is. And especially if it's a 1-3, but the sixth line, like a 6-2, for example, is going to be all about, what it's going to be tomorrow, and how can we secure in a way the future of humanity, through certain teachings. And it's always this, as I said, like cutting edge, it's and sometimes too much in the future, and then it's not grounded enough, and then nothing happens because it's too ahead of its time. So again, the sixth line can learn a lot from the other lines to stay grounded.
I absolutely
Does that answer the
it.
question?
Yes, absolutely. And for me, the keywords were short-sighted. That's why you have to keep digging, because it makes perfect sense. And the detail, where sixth line is just the big picture. It's the bird's eye view. Yes. That's why you're on the roof in a way. I love that. I really love that. And that's so clear. And that's exactly why I loved the course that, and actually I took a couple of courses that you produced, and some in collaborations with Luciano Armani. But let's talk about the 6 lines course, because you've given, now this is sort of like, it could be added to the course, because this is now like, this is what you do in marketing. Although you do have, I love the breakdown in the courses, you cover each line with 4 different areas, and it's just really, really easy to consume or go back to and refresh on what you need to do. So maybe you're the better person to explain. Otherwise, I will explain everything myself. So let's talk about this course.
Yeah, so the course is quite simple, but goes pretty deep. So it's broken down into the 6 lines. So there are 6 different modules, and for every line you get 4 different videos. One talking about your life's work, the other talking about your brand, and so marketing, and mostly what we've been talking about now. The other about your health, and then the 4th one is about relationship patterns for different lines, which is super interesting as well. And then there's I recently uploaded the intro to the course as well, to explain actually what are the lines, where can you find them in your profile, how do they work together, and so on. And so that's the course. You get like anywhere between 30 to 50 minutes of content for every line, but it's quite condensed. So, one video might be 10 minutes, but you get like a lot of information in one video. And like you said, like the purpose of it is really so that people can just go back to it all the time, as, to just refresh the knowledge in their own minds.
I find that not only on a personal level, this course was great. It's to really see, especially the advice around health, and there was also advice about looking at some areas from your unconscious line position, whether, so there is just so much angles that you sometimes maybe you were even doing it wrong, and that's why you are feeling all the time tired or burnt out, or even in business, while you're talking about the brand and things that you covered here, and you covered even some extra things here, so this is a good addition to it. But it's also about relationships, which relationships is what business is as well. It's not all just marketing, right? It's relationships with your clients. It's how you form this communication, interaction, how people see you, how they perceive you. And I think I found that extremely, extremely valuable. Because, business, for me, in my view, business is just an extension of life. It's not a separate thing. You are there, you're dealing with people, you're feeling, if somebody rejects you, you're feeling the rejection. If somebody said something bad, you're feeling offended. It's a world of feelings, and it's very difficult to separate yourself. So understanding all these things, and I think lines are absolutely brilliant, the knowledge of lines. Yeah.
And here you're talking about the difference between prosperity and wealth, which is something that Richard Rudd, the founder of the Gene Keys, keeps talking about. Wealth is just this accumulation of money, and then really you're just interested mostly in the business marketing side of things. But prosperity is the flow in all areas of your life, and abundance in all areas of your life. It starts with your health. That's the foundation. And then it goes on to your relationships, and then you can think about life's work, branding. But really, branding and marketing is just the tip of the iceberg, but all of the other stuff is below the water, but that's actually the foundation of the business. And business is just an extension of how you live your life.
It's so true. It's so true. I love it. Guys, on this note, I think we're going to bid Fabrice goodbye. Fabrice, thank you so much for sharing. I really, really love it. There was so much information. I think that, guys, you can go back and look at whatever we shared here, but I recommend that you take that course. It's extremely affordable. There's no excuse. The link is in the description to this podcast. If you're listening to us on any of the platforms, or if you're watching this as a video, the link will be here as well. So click on it and grab yourself a course and go through these lines, learn about yourself, learn about the others. Because when you're learning about those, it's not just about your two lines. For me, the biggest eye opener was learning about line 5. As I mentioned, I have line 3. Everyone in my surroundings are 3-5. So what is this line 5? And it was something that, gave me so much. It gave me so much awareness, and I no longer need to feel like I have to judge or have to play victim. All these kind of things. I see my projections. It opened up my world. And that's why I think that knowledge, human design in general, helps us understand each other. It's not all just about yourself. But with these 6 lines, that's enough information to really, really practice self-acceptance within relationships, getting to know others, and really experience this life in a very beautiful way.
Yeah, and the lines are the most approachable as well, and that's why it's the first course that I ever put out there. And it's been recently remade, and with Luciano's new visuals and so on. So it's a fresh course, but the content and me speaking, actually, it was the first course that I made a while back, because it's the most obvious, the easiest to look at, and I think the most impactful in the short term as well, because it's stuff that you can just implement immediately, and that's going to have an effect already tomorrow.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Fabrice. And guys,
thank you. My pleasure.
I'm so delighted that I'm getting to bring you so much practical information. This is my line 1, right? Practical information. Go implement this. If you have some ideas that's from this show about your marketing, go and do it now. Post something. If you're line 2, film yourself. Something. Do something to take away practical implication from here, practical implementations, and then definitely grab yourself a copy of that course. Thanks, Fabrice. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and
thank you, Juliette.
See you in the next episode.